For almost like 13 years now, I've been doing speedruns, which is where you play a game and try to beat it as fast as possible. This has actually had a bit of a downside as it kind of impacts my ability to play games casually. If I pick up a game that I feel is really good for speedrunning, I try to sit there and play through it as if I'm speedrunning it. And this actually came up when I tried the demo for a game called Windswept, a game very much inspired by traditional Donkey Kong Country games. So imagine my excitement when Hat Studios, the publisher of the game, offered me an early access code for the game to try out and make a review for. So I was very excited to give it a shot. The demo was a whole lot of fun, even though I didn't really do the best at it, and so I was excited to see how the game itself was, as even my own personal belief, and I posted after they announced the release date, was that this game was probably going to be very sick when it came to speedruns. And having now completed the game, I can definitely say that it will probably be very good, just not in my own hands. So today I want to give a review, or sort of like an overview, and talk about Windswept. So again, I mentioned Windswept is very much inspired by Donkey Kong Country. They actually specified Donkey Kong Country 2 a lot, and I can definitely feel that when I'm playing this game, just because when you have, like, the people who have played the Donkey Kong Country games, there is a bit of a shift between the three of them as to how much they focus on like puzzles, platforming, action, and other things like that. And Donkey Kong Country 2 is often considered to be one of the harder ones to play because it does have a lot more precision platforming and a lot more challenge to it. And this game definitely rears that quite often. The early levels are pretty simple and get you used to the controls. You have the two characters that you can switch between, both of which have specific moves that are done when they're in the lead. For example, Marbles, the duck, is the one that has the ability to fly and hover in place, very similar to Dixie. Now, that may seem like they have the clear advantage as they can just hover in place and fly and just charge and get over large gaps. The Checkers, the turtle that you can play as, also has their own advantages, so while it may be advantageous to use Marbles a whole lot to fly over gaps and clear areas that kind of make the platforming trivial, it's not the always like the die-hard solution. There are actually times where in my playthrough I was flying over areas and just straight up fell into a pit because I was trying too hard to skip over challenges. Or there are sometimes enemies are placed in such a way where if you try to just fly over everything, you actually will just get hit in midair. So while it may seem like it's a clear advantage that you can just fly over and skip a bunch of stuff, it isn't actually always the best thing to do. And there are some challenges that are exclusively used with Checkers to where flying provides no advantage. And this is actually something I think they did pretty well, because in DKC2, Dixie kind of did trivialize a lot of the platforming. So there wasn't a whole lot of challenge in that game designed specifically around using Diddy. Dixie was just inherently a better solution and better option almost the entirety of the game, or at least here in Windswept, they try to make Checkers useful in specific areas where his abilities can shine, and the ability to fly may not be the greatest solution in the situation. The game consists of 40 main levels and an entire section of bonus levels. In the main levels, you can find a myriad of collectibles. There are coins that you can collect, similar to the Kong letters. There's a cloud icon, and of course there are various bonuses in the bonus rooms that you can find hidden throughout each level that collect little moon tokens. There's also a collectible for getting every collectible in the level, and then finally at the end of the level you're also tasked with trying to hit a pinwheel by trying to land on the exit of the stage from a high enough height to order to fill up and hit the pinwheel. Each of these count towards completion, and if you want to get everything in the game, you're gonna need to get it from every single level. Thankfully, the game keeps track of the collectibles you have obtained, so if you're struggling to get one, you can always return later, and you don't have to worry about doing everything in one go, which is, for me, a pretty big deal, because then it got to the point where some of the levels I was getting a little too annoyed trying to get some of the challenges, so just moving on and coming back later when I could actually just have more patience do it was pretty good. The levels themselves start out pretty simple enough, as the game gives you time and space to sort of learn the controls and figure things out, but then it very quickly, and I mean kind of quickly, jumps into a bit more difficulty, where I feel like some of the early levels start to get a little bit more dangerous and a little bit more sketchy, pretty quick and pretty early on into like World 2, you'll start getting a lot more challenging levels, which I guess is fair because, again, DKC2 very much did the same thing. The second world is where things got a whole lot trickier right off the bat because the expectation, at least with DKC2, was that you might have had some experience with the original game, so you should have some idea as to how the control plays. Where here, the difficulty kind of jumps pretty quickly, but the developers themselves have admitted that the intent and a lot of design is actually reminiscent of that era of games where you just kind of have to take your lumps. You play through a level, you figure out as you go, and you just try and try again. And I feel like a lot of puzzles are actually designed that way, where some of them, there are areas where I just straight up got hit by an enemy that spawned in very quickly off screen, came in, swooped me, killed me, and then I had to restart. Thankfully, the game has unlimited lives, so you don't have to worry about dying so many times, do these, figure it out as you go sort of methods, and then having to restart the entire level. So as long as you hit the checkpoint, or if you're just dying very early in the level, there's no real consequences. It is just a try until you figure it out situation, which I feel in this case, because there are no lives, it's pretty excusable. The only gripe I have is that some of the levels, the checkpoint is either way too early in the level or way too late into the level. Some levels, it'll feel like you're going through only like 2 platforming sections, and then you get the checkpoint, and then the whole rest of the level is like another 2 minutes long that you have to do in that one checkpoint. So if you die, you go all the way back to that checkpoint. That was maybe only like 30 seconds into the level. Comparatively, there's a level where the checkpoint is like very close to the end of the level. So you're playing the level for like 3 minutes, get to the checkpoint, and then the checkpoint from there to the end is probably about 30 seconds. So I feel like some of the like halfway points aren't very consistent throughout the whole game, and there's even one level that the checkpoint doesn't actually do anything for you unless you're trying to get everything. I'm not going to spoil it. The footage you're seeing is specifically designed to avoid showing late game levels, since there really isn't a whole lot that I want to spoil. But there is at least one level where it's really not needed to get the checkpoint, and unless you're trying to go for everything, and the level can be completed very quickly without it. And that's another thing, is some levels, they're just kind of varied in length. Some levels feel like they drag on for way too long, and some of them feel like they just only were there for maybe a minute. This is something I imagine they try to do to just balance out, where they want to have some levels that are longer and trickier, but then ease you back into things by having a slightly shorter level after it. So I'm not really going to fault them for it. They definitely wanted to have a balance between being very difficult and very challenging, but still rewarding enough to where if you get really frustrated and you just barely scrape by and finish a tricky level, they throw you a bone with something that's a little bit more simple so that you don't feel nearly as frustrated and you can sort of relax back into the trickier parts of the game. So I'm not really going to fault them for it. It's definitely a design choice that, at least for me, it did help in some sections where there was a level very late into the game where it kind of felt like it was taking me so long to get through the level. The checkpoint didn't really help, and I was getting really annoyed. By the time I finally figured out how to play the level and finish it, the next level was very short and sweet, and it was like a relief where I was able to feel like I got back into the groove of actually being able to play the game and do well at the game, now that I could have a moment to relax. The game also includes boss fights, very similar to Donkey Kong Country. A lot of the bosses aren't really that much to write home about. There's at least one boss that I was very confused as to what I was actually supposed to do, and died countless amount of times trying to figure it out, because it really doesn't make it obvious what some of the boss's weaknesses are, and you're, again, kind of just forced to take your lumps and figure it out. I feel like it's fine for the main levels, because a lot of the challenge just comes from figuring out where platforms are, where enemies spawn. But some of the bosses, because of how they don't have any dialogue, there's no text, there's no anything, you just kind of go into a boss fight and try to figure out what you need to do to actually hit them. And since the bosses don't have checkpoints, if you're getting to a part where a boss goes on for a few phases and you still, you haven't really figured out what you need to do to actually hit them, it can be frustrating to get late into a boss and then die and have to redo the whole thing. Now, there aren't that many boss fights, so it's not like that's a gigantic deal, but it is just one thing to note that some of the bosses feel a little bit too vague to figure out what you're supposed to do, and one of them I feel is very atrocious when it comes to that. But again, it's a spoiler, so I'm not really going to reveal what boss it is. Just know that there's at least one that I was very confused throughout the entire fight as to what I was even doing to begin with. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I am a speedrunner, so I like to go fast and do a lot of tricks and stuff like that. And another thing I tend to do when I'm speedrunning stuff or learning these games or messing around with them is I try to see if I can find any glitches. So did I find anything useful? I think I did. I'm going to show it. It is from a later level, but there is at least one example of something where I accidentally did a glitch. Where it feels like I clipped myself into a wall, and I could probably swim out of bounds through this, but I kind of just died because I didn't really know what happened. So this is definitely something I imagine other people, like people who are actually going to be good at this game, can figure out and maybe make use of. But at least without really trying, I did find one out of bounds glitch where I got clipped into a wall. So it'll probably be useful for people who get a little bit more invested into this, but at least for me, it was something that I wasn't really trying to find glitches for. I was just, for the most part, trying to see how fast I could get through the game. So all in all, how did I feel about the game? I really enjoyed it. As somebody whose favorite Super Nintendo game is Donkey Kong Country 2, this game really hits a good spot for me where the design, I feel, does complement going fast very well. The level design, I feel, does a better job at trying to incorporate the abilities of the two characters better than Donkey Kong Country did. It feels like, while in this game, marbles being able to fly should be a clear advantage in every situation, some of the level design is actually catered to not flying, which a lot of Donkey Kong Country 2 and 3 didn't really do that much, so Dixie was always the advantage. Here, being able to fly isn't the solution to everything, so I feel like their levels design did a better job at catering to the two different playstyles the characters have and the abilities they have when having them as the lead and their like buddy up ability. The levels are pretty good, varied in length and varied in difficulty. Even late game, some levels may be a little bit easier than others, but the challenge does ramp up pretty quickly. So if you feel that the World 1 is pretty simple, no, don't worry, it gets difficult pretty quickly. And there's always the post game if you want even more difficulty. The bosses can be a little bit vague, but don't overstay their welcome. Some of them can go by pretty quickly, and the fights aren't terrible. It's just that some of their designs are a little bit vague on what you're supposed to do, but I don't think that's inherently a bad thing. So overall, I definitely really enjoyed this game, and it was a fantastic playthrough, and it is definitely worth something that you should check out. In the description, I will have a link to the Steam page. If you're interested in checking it out yourself, I do highly recommend it. Again, big thanks to Hat Studios for giving me access to this game early, and I'm really excited to see what WeatherFell, the developer, has cooking next. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.